Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to Transforming Guyana, Season 2, Episode 4. Today, we want to talk about infrastructure development in the emerging Guyanese oil and gas economy. I am Terrence Blackman, Chair and Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York, and the founder of the Guyana Business Journal. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. David Lewis of Manchester Trade Incorporated and the Caribbean Policy Consortium. As is our practice, we like to welcome with a short uh, reiteration of the GBJ vision. Our vision is to provide innovative and practical recommendations that advance the goal of securing an open, safe, prosperous, and cohesive Guyana in which all Guyanese, irrespective of race, class, ethnicity, or religious persuasion, share equitably in the economic prosperity of Guyana. And to this end, this series, this collaboration with the Caribbean Policy Consortium, aims to bring together experts and prominent voices in Guyana, the Caribbean, and the diaspora, and broadly across the globe to discuss the impacts of Guyana's oil and gas development. We aim to offer a nuanced look at Guyana's opportunities and potential pitfalls, and to explore strategies to maximize the positive impacts the oil revenues can have on Guyana's people and future while mitigating the risks that other countries have faced. And since we're coming to you from the diaspora, we would like to identify some of the more promising roles, some of the roles not necessarily promising, but some of the more supporting roles that the diaspora, the Guyanese diaspora, can play in supporting this transformation, this transition that's occurring in Guyana. Today, it's a great pleasure. We're joined for the hour by the Honorable David Patterson, and I often say short things on the introduction. So I want to say that David Patterson, BSc with honors, member of Parliament and former Minister of Public Infrastructure in Guyana, uh, will join us. He is currently serving, I think, as the shadow minister for the oil and gas sector for the opposition. I should say, in full disclosure, David is a friend. Uh, for those of you in Guyana, his educational journey began at St. Gabriel's Primary School, and I know there are some of you here who are listening who St. Gabriel's, and then at St. Stanislaus. David earned his BS in quantity surveying from Greenwich University in the United Kingdom. He became a chartered quantity surveyor, real estate appraiser, project manager, and David comes to us with a wealth of experience spanning over 25 years in quantity surveying, project management, appraisal services. He holds memberships in prestigious organizations such as the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and the Architecture and Surveying Institute. So I wanted to say that because I know that many of you know that beyond his professional accomplishments, David has been an active member of the AFC, and he has served as parliamentarian from 2006 to 2011. He's held the role of General Secretary of the AFC. But most important to me, and as part of our fellowship, he has been involved in leadership positions in various community organizations, sports organizations, most notably the Guyana Amateur Basketball Federation, and one of the favorites of many of us in the Caribbean, the Georgetown Dominoes Association, and he's a Rotary Club member of Demerara. So I want to welcome David Patterson to the GBJ. I also want to welcome a favorite of the GBJ, Arthur, who was on our very first program. Arthur is the director of AMI's energy practice, and he helps companies expand into Guyana and the wider Latin American region through market intelligence and analysis. And so whether it's conducting due diligence on local partners, sizing the market or finding the most attractive risk-adjusted opportunities. AMI has led more than 3,000 Latin American market studies since 1993 and has project experience in over 20 jurisdictions in the Americas. So I've properly introduced both Arthur and David, and let me take this opportunity to invite Dr. David Lewis to bring a few words of welcome from our partners, the Caribbean Policy Consortium. David?
Thank you, Terence. Good morning to you and to our audience in Guyana, in the diaspora, and regionally and internationally. Honorable David Patterson, thank you for joining us, taking time from your schedule. Arthur, good to connect again. And yes, Terence, Arthur was actually one of our first speakers on the webinar, but also when we started our live forum series with the first one of the first ones down in Miramar, Florida last year. So thanks for joining us again. This topic on infrastructure has actually been burning in pretty much all the discussions of our webinars since we started this series back in June of 2022. Particularly, I think, and I'll mention the reference made by outgoing U.S. Ambassador Sarah Lynch, exhorting all in Guyana, not just the government, but everybody in Guyana, to really work hard to ensure that the wealth accruing to the country from the oil and gas boom is something that all Guyanese eventually benefit from, and that the key to that making it successful is to ensure that people see and feel and live that growth is there. Not just the numbers and reports from organizations, whether in Guyana or outside, or is Guyana the 10th producer, or will it be more? Is it number one per capita? I think she made a strong call just at the lay person's level. None of that matters if the tangible results are not seen and felt by people. And this is something we've been discussing on and off in many of our webinars, particularly in terms of, what it means to be able to leverage in a sustainable, strategic, programmed, and orderly fashion this economic growth, this new wealth from the public sector, use it to invest in human development, in the infrastructure needs of the country, and what I call, just the basic needs that people will feel, well, if we have this wealth, are we seeing it in terms of education, health, housing, water, electricity, and more, just the basic things. And then, of course, the physical infrastructure to make the country much more competitive, sustainable, efficient, and inclusive. And those of you who have joined us in the past know that my pet peeve is that there is no reason that within the next 2-3 years, Guyana should not have the most efficient, diverse, and modern utility in the world. Basically, a new utility using all the new technologies, covering all the areas, using all resources, because it is there, it can be done. Resources are not a problem, and it's a great opportunity to, as many countries in the developing world did with communication, they jumped completely from wasting time and money on landlines and jumped straight into the cellular, mobile, digital world. And that can be done. And my pet peeve has been there is no reason that by the end of 2-3 years, every Guyanese, no matter where in Guyana, should have 24/7 electricity, water, and internet, because those are the basic tenets of infrastructure for people these days. And that's something attainable. But then, of course, we've got all the other areas of infrastructure: housing, health, education, buildings, roads, bridges. We've all been seeing the news and so on. And I think one of the challenges is also that how do you manage this, and what can be done in what time frameworks? It can't all be done at once. We just don't have the physical or human capacity for that, even if you have the monies. So that's where planning comes in. The work that people like Mr. Patterson have done in the past in the private sector and then in the government. You need to plan these things. Okay, we need a new modern utility. Do we do the roads first and then the utility? Do we do the cabling first? And of course, we're in 2023. We have experienced people in Guyana, in the Caribbean, in the Americas, in the world, with companies that have done this, been there, done that, as the young people say. So this is not putting people on Mars. This has been done elsewhere. It's a matter of how do we plan it and how do we do it so that the negative effects, because there always will be some negative effects, are as minimal as possible. And those of us who watched one of our earlier programs know that our discussions of the dangers of Dutch disease was precisely that. Okay, you can't just go and do it all at once because it's really going to strain the economic system and put things out of balance. So let me just stop there, Terence. I think this is very timely. It's coming right at the right time in the discussion in Guyana. And we hope to have a very good discussion with our colleagues today and with the audience. I see we're already getting some good feedback online. So thank you all, and let's have a good session.
Well, thank you, David. And I wanted to, as always, I think, in this era of oil and gas, I think we're often not fully appreciative of what's happening. And so as we always like to do is to kind of give some sense of for properly understanding Guyana's oil and gas potential, and then thinking about broadly the role of infrastructure in oil and gas development. And so I know, Arthur, you're someone who are constantly on the top of this, constantly looking at this. So help us this morning to kind of give a quick sense of, from your perspective, Guyana's broad oil and gas potential at this moment, and give us a sense of what you think is the role of infrastructure in broadly this emerging oil and gas economy. And then we'll pivot to David Patterson to give us some sense of the broad infrastructure that might be needed, and other questions which we'll try to get him to address. So set the stage for us, Arthur.
Great. First of all, thank you, Terence, David. It's a pleasure to be here as always. Thank you for having me on, and David Patterson. It's great to share this panel with you. So I know that the numbers sometimes feel not meaningless, but repetitive, but it's important to provide some context before we dive in. And then I'll explain a little bit more in detail what all these numbers mean. So we all know there's 11 billion barrels of recoverable oil equivalent resources in Guyana. 20% of that is estimated to be associated gas. We still don't know exactly what Exxon and the Starbuck Consortium is going to do with the gas. The gas is reinjected to recover more oil, and there's debates going on whether it can be done to to take advantage of that gas. Of course, there's the gas short pipeline, but there's still a lot of question marks around the gas, and I think it's important to keep that as an important side note as Guyana progresses in its development. Its current production is 400,000 barrels per day right now. That's pretty impressive for a country that had no oil, 4 years ago. First oil started late 2019. It's an unprecedented rate. You don't see that kind of scale and speed of development anywhere else really in the past few decades. So it really is a credit to the Starbuck Consortium and also the Guyanese people and the government for setting the stage to allow that to happen. So you got to give credit where it's due. Looking ahead, that 400,000 that we're currently at supposed to reach 1.2 million barrels per day by 2027, and then 1.7 million barrels per day by 2035, so next decade. That would put Guyana in the top 15 in global production and third in Latin America, just behind Brazil and Mexico. And in terms of revenue, that will be multi-billion dollars of additional income for the NRF. There's different estimates, but will definitely be upwards of 10 billion per year for the NRF. So that's a lot of money and a lot of potential opportunities that can come out of that money. For the FPSOs, we have two currently operating, Liza Destiny and Unity, but some say that it could be up to 10. The next one will be the Prosperity FPSO. Basically, what all of this means is that Guyana is the fastest growing new oil province in the last decade by far. When it comes into exploration and new discoveries, the Stabroek Consortium is still the one leading the helm there. They recently proposed the sixth major development called Whiptail, which would start operations in 2027. That project development would include, I think, upwards of 70 wells drilled starting next year, and then progressing through the next couple of years. What really is a bit, let's say, worrisome is the lack of discoveries elsewhere outside the Stabroek Consortium. This is leading to some sort of centralization in which a lot of the opportunities of labor and for the Guyanese people and a lot of the, let's say, resources are completely dominated by Exxon because there's not any other competitors currently successfully extracting oil. The most advanced exploration in Guyana involves CGX and Frontera. They said recently that they discovered oil at the Way 1 well, which is offshore, and it's part of the Way 1 is part of two wells that in the quarantine block that the companies had committed to drill. They had another well called the Kawa 1, which struck oil and gas in May. So those are the most advanced developments, exploration developments outside of the Stabroek block. And the Frontera CGX group is expected to be the next group or the next consortium to move from exploration into development. So that would be a very positive thing for Guyana, having another consortium operating in the country, allowing the government some more leverage when negotiating future contracts. Of course, it won't be at the scale of what we're seeing in the Stabroek Consortium. That's one in a million or 1 in a billion. So it won't be in terms of billions of recoverable oil that we're seeing in the Stabroek Consortium, but it would still be good for increasing the competition within the Guyanese market, increasing opportunities for the Guyanese people to have two consortiums operating instead of just one. So with that set, with the foundation set, there's I can go on about the implications of oil and gas discoveries, and I think we're going to go into that a little bit deeper through our discussions later today. But I liked what David said in terms of making wealth distribution equally felt by all the people in Guyana, and that means everyone feeling this tangible growth on a daily basis, and that could be something as simple as having access to electricity or having clean water. And I think that we are still a few years away from that, and I think it's not because of a lack of desire or a lack of effort from the Guyanese government. It's just the lack of implementation, let's call it. And I think that's where planning really plays a big role, and that's why we're here today, is to discuss how we can help create the foundation or the roadmap for those changes to happen. There's no doubt that more storage facilities are needed for the oil and gas development. More equipment is needed. But often what I hear from talking to the major oil players is that there's more. The biggest gap or the biggest deficit is the lack of technical labor to help with some of the more complex offshore exploration jobs. And I know that Guyana and the consortium are working on creating technical institutes to help train Guyanese people to help with those jobs. But at the scale that the consortium is talking about growing, it really is hard to see how there's not going to be some deficit between what's required and what's available, just because of the size of the population. It's very small when you think about the size of oil production that's expected. So I think in addition to the technical training that's going to be required from within the Guyanese community, we're also going to need to improve some immigration laws. There's a lot of very experienced and intelligent colleagues in Trinidad and Tobago who have worked with the oil and gas industry for decades. They, are suffering a declining oil and gas industry because of maturing reserves. So it could be to Guyana's benefit to depend on Trinidad, and also to look at other CARICOM countries that have a lot of experienced and intelligent people that can help. Not to say that there's always a hesitation to kind of open the immigration doors because of loss of opportunities for the Guyanese people, but I don't think that's the case. I think there's plenty for everyone, and it's got to be a joint effort. And that's the only way that Guyana will be able to sustain this unprecedented growth at a sustainable rate. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now, and then we can circle back on some of the things I mentioned later.
Yeah, Arthur, you've added some really interesting dimension of the conversation. So I don't want to, I should introduce, I should say that David, Arthur noted that, this from discovery to gas, this was perhaps unprecedented, starting in 2019. Your tenure in political leadership overlapped with this sort of breakneck speed to first oil, and I'm sure that you were central to some of the discussions that were there. And I want to give you free rein to speak in how you want to sort of, but I want you to bring this through the lens of the current infrastructure landscape in Guyana. So these questions, equitable distribution of resources, you can address however you want, but I want you to bring it through the context of resources, because I think the key point that, Arthur and David and a number of us said, and I know at some point you might want to say something about the Gas to Shore project and about gas. And the key thing for us is that you have to do something concrete about electricity quickly, cheaply, and now, in order to sustain the immigration and all of the other things that are being discussed. And so, I'll give you a chance to speak in the way you want to speak, and then we'll come back after you've given your remarks. So, David Patterson, you're on mute. You're muted, Dave. I'll just, yeah. So I tried to unmute you, but there you go. Yes.
My apologies. Good morning, Terence.
Once again,
Arthur. Pleasure to meet you, David. And you're right. And I do think that Arthur's summation was on the ball. David, your plead and your concerns, I do think they're shared by all Guyanese, home and abroad. But Terence, as you were saying, you pegged the infrastructure movement, I think, in 2019, but it actually started with the advent of the oil discovery in 2015. Obviously, as you know, the construction industry as well as the services sector related to the associated industries, started gearing up from there, Most recently, in the half-year report, I think it was issued a couple of days ago, construction infrastructure work is pegged to increase for 2023 by 4% for the first half of the year. So you could just imagine what we're under. Of course, with such a steep increase in such a short space of time, it exposed several issues that would not have been evident. Namely, labor, of course, as Arthur mentioned, material shortage, and surprisingly enough, availability of land. Labor issues would be anticipated. We have a native population of around 800,000, as you know, Terence. We've been at that for the last 7 decades. Hence, we have a very limited labor pool, coupled with the fact of high migration, not only at the graduate level, that's what but at the semi-skilled and skilled labor level. Fortunately, we're seeing for the semi-skilled and the skilled labor a reverse. Persons are coming back. I mean, traditionally, they would have gone to the Caribbean. Our skilled artisans would have gone to the Caribbean, and particularly Barbados and Trinidad. They're returning. So that's a good prospect for us. But however, there still remains a significant gap for our labor pool. Materials issue, simply a case of supply and demand, lack of production capacity. That's some of the challenges. I mean, all the base materials are here, locally, or they're available locally, but we can't produce and deliver them to keep up pace with the industry's demands at the moment. And a strange thing that is occurring, land availability. It may sound strange for Guyana being a country of 83,000 square miles. And I estimate, currently only occupy about 20% of our land mass. But in relation to the oil and gas sector, all our current operations are centered along a half-mile strip along the eastern bank of the Demerara River. That's only about a 15-mile stretch from the mouth of the river inland. Hence, competition for these lands, availability of the land is high. Developers are making use of any available land space at the moment, and this is a time is bringing them into conflict with the local existing communities, as you know. And that's quite evident with the amount of court cases you would have been filed recently. So that's an issue that we'd have to address. And as both David and Arthur said, the major challenge, as I see it, is the lack of an overall national infrastructure plan. While our opportunities are boundless, investors and potential partners are willing, they're all remaining in the starting block, waiting the starters orders, to know where exactly we should be investing. With an overall infrastructure plan, our investors, potential partners can have a bird's eye view of the landscape, allowing them to make informed decisions. Most infrastructure projects takes about 2 years and upwards to complete, and can be easily transferred from one location to another, hence the importance of getting it right from the start. I'll give you 2 examples. The country will need in the future deep water port urgently. Not only for oil and gas sector, but also to support our commercial imports and exports. Yet a decision on the location has not been made. There's been a lot of talk for Berbice location, but recently I've seen the government has ruled that out. There have been previous studies. The last one done by the IDB, I think in 2018, which located somewhere along the Region 5 strip. And that was the most suitable location, but a final decision hasn't been made as yet. And that, I think, can inhibit us to reaching our potential. Gas development, Arthur, you mentioned that. And you mentioned that 20% of the discovery so far contains gas. However, without the overall plan of where we'll actually finally locate all of them, and most of these discoveries, Arthur, I think the southwestern side, closer to Suriname, Berbice. We haven't made a final decision as yet where we're going to locate, say, a potential gas industry. We can do that now, even though we're waiting for the study, so that developers can actually know where we want to go in the future and start planning, acquiring land, and start building out the infrastructure, because as you say, by 2027, 2030, we should hopefully have a well-developed gas program. Currently, we're building, as Terence would have mentioned, we're building our first gas industry in Wales. No one knows if we're going to continue there, which is quite a way away from the major discoveries of the gassy discovery. If we're going to stay there, what are the implications? Another major challenge, which we don't like to address, is really, as Arthur, you would know, doing business in Guyana. The ease of doing business in Guyana. I mean, all our processes, pre and post construction, takes a lengthy time. We've been making a lot of progress as a country over the last 10 years, and we must admit that we've been making a lot of progress in addressing this ease of doing business. But investors still continue to express their frustrations on the lengthy time for our process of taking it. As well as another major issues that we would have to do is the lack of enforceable building regulations in the industry. My suggestions to address these gaps, of course, it's a massive infrastructure plan, upgrade our building regulations, of course, education, as Arthur mentioned, opportunities in vocational and technical studies. But we have started, but I don't think we're keeping a pace with the industry. I mean, the oil and gas industry really would like us to be further afield at the moment. Policies wise, I mean, if we look at the government policies wise, first thing, we must revise and modernize our local immigration policies. Actually, you mentioned that we'll be attracting several thousand migrant workers, and they're much needed. But it's only fair to these workers and the rest of the country that they should know early their status when they come here, their future when they go here. When they come here, the future, how long they can spend, and what are the areas in which they can expect. And of course, we have a jittery local population, which we'd have to also ensure and encourage and confront them to say that, I mean, immigrants are not bad. America, every other developed countries are built with immigration. I mean, there's a lot of Guyanese who are in the diaspora who've helped contribute meaningfully to several countries, so we should welcome them. But these are the conditions. Right now, it's really up, as I said, up in the air. We should address that early, so that would encourage more persons, not only just to come to Guyana, but come and stay and develop the country in collaboration with those who are here. Fiscal incentives, I mean, we have to work on, I mentioned before, on the ease of doing business in Guyana. We have a lot. We have a lot of generous fiscal incentives, but we have to ensure that all of these incentives are applied in a fair, accountable, and transparent manner. Sadly, Terence, as you would have mentioned, I mean, there's accusations that suggest that this is not currently being the case, so we have to confront those issues quite frontally. Of course, I mean, one of my pet peeves being in the industry is the question of building regulations, building codes, zoning, the lack of that. I mean, I think right now the oil and gas industry is moving the country as opposed to directing our policies, as opposed to us as a country planning and directing our investors where they should. And I mentioned that in particular, I mean, there was a company who, through no fault of their own, I mean, I know people like that, but they constructed a warehouse facility in Houston, and the residents nearby took them to court and took EPA to court, who granted them a permit and won. No fault of the company, because obviously they went through the right processes, but because we don't have these areas locked down and defined before, they fell afoul of our EPA regulations.
Actually, an intervention right there, David. In the announcement of this program, that was a question that came up from a number of people, the issue of the integration of environmental and other social considerations into this kind of massive, to what extent is there an infrastructure for that? And they pointedly wanted me to bring that question to you. So I'm glad you raised that. And perhaps if you want to speak a bit more on that, that would.
Right, but we have we are in a unique situation. Prior to oil and gas, we as a country had committed, everyone. This is not a different administration. We committed that our best bet would be being environmentally friendly, preserve our rainforests, transition to renewable energies, and those things like that. And that is a long-term goal, and I do think that everyone in the country still believes in that. However, as Arthur and David and yourself and everyone keeps mentioning, the pace of the oil and gas industry, and I think every Guyanese, bar a few, are quite welcoming of for this new industry. And I mean, it's been transformational. It's the most money the country has gotten in one single lump area. However, we haven't made the linkage and the definitions between where we originally wanted to be a totally nice green country and that of an oil and gas producing country. So there are conflicts, and obviously, as I said, the industry is setting the pace for the country. And I'll give you an example. The Houston area is now the epicenter of oil and gas activity. But originally, Houston, and there was in residential area, it was zoned parcel. The persons purchased house lots in Houston for residential purposes. Most of the original owners of that entire Houston area, of course, the first section, purchased the land for residential uses. Gisby, local company, quite glad, very supportive of them, won the contract for the first shore base in Houston. And that immediately transformed, and of course now that transformed that area from and Gisby was originally simply to be a containerized cargo extension of Munishwar Wharf. That's supposed to be, right? And it immediately transferred the Houston area into the epicenter of our oil and gas activity. The sector, because we agreed to support enhanced rapid oil and gas activities, the area now obviously, and it's surrounded by residential areas, the area now became the center. So EPA were caught in some of it has been rezoned, some hasn't, but EPA has been caught in a dilemma whereby because of the lack of the pace entry, lack of planning, and the lack of definition, they now obviously follow the rules, follow what's existing, and therein lies a conflict. So we also have to remember that where we are at, most of our activities on the coast, it's challenged by climate change and currently. So we really do have a balancing act, and at some point in time, we do have to take a half a step back, because we don't want to take too far a step back and affect the pace in which the country's developing. We have to take a half a step back and look at this thing holistically and try to marry our initial ambitions with the new oil and gas sector. But we can go into that further thing. But I want to quickly mention something that I do think is important. International collaborations, greatly recommended, 100% recommended. We have a local content law, which is a start. It's been somewhat successful, but like any new law, it needs to be constantly reviewed to keep a pace with the oil and gas sector. But it's a start. It's recommended. We do recommend local collaborations, and in particularly, I want to say this, and of course, to be fair to everyone, I am in the sector, but I'm speaking about services for the industry, infrastructure industry. Local expertise is invaluable, and I say this because let's say that Guyana is we're fortunate. We're not within any seismic zone. We don't mean, even though we're part of the Caribbean, we're not adversely affected by direct hurricane activities and those things like that. You know what I mean? And what we find in the services industry is that companies are coming into Guyana, constructing infrastructure projects, and sometimes what we find, they're over-designed, if that's a word. I mean, I know you can't over-design. However, without a local equity, so company from Miami, the factor safety is 2, 3, 3.5, because of course there's hurricanes and those things in Miami. But when you come here without a local expertise, you actually spend more time on your infrastructure and those things like that. So I really would recommend, even if just on a consulting capacity, before because you get everything done in some other country, and obviously the professionals that you use, who are true professionals, with a lack of data and the lack of knowledge of the local industry, generally over design issues. So therefore, the collaboration is so. This is a plea for all the persons there. You know what I mean? Obviously, I know there are challenges. I mean, the local, as I said, ease of doing business, the lack of technical capacity. But I do think the partnering with local persons would be really invaluable when you're going forward. I'll stop there and take the questions more specifically, Terence. Sorry for going on a bit too long.
Oh, no. I think it's important. So I'll give you a chance, David L., to sum this up. We have these, in a sense, we have an industry pulling the country into the future. And, David P. wants to sort of take a half step back and have a kind of holistic assumption, a holistic view of the thing, to sort of figure out how we want to be, good and green and exploit our energy. And Arthur D. wants to ensure that we have a robust electricity system, a kind of plan for managing the associated gas, and a plan for managing the money that we actually are going to get if we produce 1.7 billion barrels per day, 1.7 million barrels per day in 2030 or 2027. It was 1.2 in 2027. Give us a thought, and then we'll open it up to the audience questions.
Right. And let me just add, I think on the whole issue we discussed of basic needs on infrastructure and so on, for Guyana particularly, we need to really highlight on top priority everything having to do with climate resilience and adaptation. As you recall, last month, one of our CPC colleagues and webinar participants, Professor Ivelaw Griffith, had an event at Maury House in Georgetown discussing an entire strategic plan for moving Georgetown inland because of rising sea level challenges and so on. And that's a basic, existential infrastructure issue for a country like Guyana. I've got 3 quick points that I think can then lead us into the broader discussion. Everything having to do with public sector capabilities and modernization. We've discussed regulatory framework, the planning, the permits, and so on. This is why, and I believe from discussions and reading and engaging with people, there is no understanding, why is Guyana still taking loans with the World Bank and the IDB and so on? I thought we were like multi-rich. We don't need, well, this is the challenge. Over the past 4 decades, the developing world has benefited from the expertise of international organizations in what was called public sector modernization programs. That means preparing your government, your bureaucrats, your organizations, your institutions to manage better, more efficiently, more inclusively, and governance structures and regulations. Guyana was not a key beneficiary of that opportunity in those 3-4 decades at the level that other countries were. So now Guyana is in a catch-up mode. And it's a catch-up mode that many of you who have worked in public sector, but also in the private sector, means all of a sudden supply demand is multiplying at a exponential rate, professor mathematician, but the resources to handle that supply demand are only growing at an arithmetic rate. And people only work from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or whatever. And there's just not enough time with the current staffing and the expertise to manage that. I think from second point, from one of our very first webinars, we discussed what I have phrased, Guyana is work in progress. And it's work in progress because Guyana has been blessed and cursed at the same time to have to manage the benefits of this largesse and the engagement with one of the top 10 global organizations that has ever existed without, frankly, any real preparation to do that before. Because Guyana jumped from being in Sea League cricket to now being in, global test match all of a sudden with Exxon. And you can't tell Exxon, put a brake on this while we prepare ourselves to handle Exxon. So that's a major challenge there. And it's something to that needs to, we need to be realistic about that and understand that what that means is greater capabilities need to be developed in the private sector if Guyana is going to do governance, due diligence, and management in the proper way to the benefit of the public sector. The role of the governor of Guyana, like any government, is to serve the public interest. Using linkages with foreign investors is a mechanism, but it is not the goal. It's a mechanism for public sector interest. Second point, and I'm glad David Patterson mentioned it, fossil fuel economy going into low carbon strategy country. And I think the government has made statements about that. And people, we need to be very clear. Yes, there is a good opportunity for, frankly, quick, good money to establish with the fossil fuel economy. But nobody in their right mind, I believe, thinks that that's going to make Guyana is going into the future to be a fossil fuel country. That's not viable. So the low carbon strategy is important, and you need to chew gum and work at the same time because that challenge is there. The good part of this is that Guyana is now not Saudi Arabia dealing with Aramco in the 1960s and 70s. Guyana is now dealing with Exxon, which is transitioning to become not a fossil fuel company like all those companies in the world, but to become a renewable energy company because they are reading the writing on the wall. That's the future of the world. Backbone with fossil fuel resources, eventual infrastructure in renewables. So that's important. And the third one, with the first, David didn't mention it, but really that challenge of local content remains, and it is a permanent one. Now that we have the law, that doesn't mean, okay, move on. No, this is work in progress. It has to continue. And the issue of human resource expertise is critical. I believe the first time we mentioned examples from other countries importing labor and so on, most of our audience blew up, Terence. People said, no, you can't do it. And now, as we've been seeing over the year, everybody's been, okay, no, this can be done properly. You target different labor sectors. You do it in a strategic manner. And people are realizing that bringing in labor in different categories where we have a deficit in Guyana is a plus to a country that has suffered from brain drain for decades. And when we look at examples of other countries, we have the benefits of a good percentage of many of those skills end up staying in country, investing, marrying, starting businesses and so on. So all that is a plus, and bringing in local Guyanese of the next generation to develop that. So I think that's something that, we're maturing in the discussion. It is politically, difficult Guyana is not the first and won't be the last country that has to deal with this. So we need to take advantage of those opportunities that have existed in the rest of the Caribbean, in the Americas, but globally as well. So let me just leave those 3 points on the table, and then you can lead us into the rest of the discussion, Terence. Thank you.
So thank you, David. So what I want to come back to some of the things that David Lewis just mentioned, but I wanted to give David Patterson a chance to start, because one question that came in, and I was reminded about some work that your office had done, David, with a Dutch risk reduction team on drainage. So Vern Singroy says, let's start with a discussion of the US 250 million that is needed to build a proper sea defense in the next 10 years, or else you folks will have to take boats to work. I recently visited Venice, and it's really not a bad idea to take a boat to work, but then you'd have to have Venice. So this should be an important part of the info. So I mean, one of the issues we want to get a sense of, like, what's a broad plan? I mean, and as David mentioned, Professor Griffith's constant refrain about moving the capital from the coast, further inland. How do we, what's the status of this infrastructure project? The project that has to do with, making the seawalls a bit more robust so that, the water doesn't jump over the wall and close the whole thing out.
All right, Terence, a very good question by Vernon. Let me correct him. Actually, the last report that was done, at the time I'm aware of, the actual figure was probably more by 1.2 billion as opposed to 250 million. Terence, we have about 480 kilometers of of existing sea defense, either concrete or hard infrastructure, or soft, which is mangroves and earthen dams. And the challenges, and most of them predates most of us here. I mean, they were done by, most of them were done in the Dutch, by the Dutch when they were original occupation. And they haven't been keeping up. Now, of course, there's the rising sea levels, as well as another mitigating factor. And we have to make a concerted decision if we're going to maintain, and I don't see us moving from where we are in the next 20 years, even though we can make preparations to do this. All our administrative systems are unfortunately or fortunately concentrated along the coast. So progressively, we have to simply address that. There was a program, and if I knew that, I would have brought a slide, but can tell you, maybe it's another time. We can show you all the areas where we know all the vulnerable areas. The ones that need urgent work, well, that's up to 2019. I can recall we started looking at that. And we have to progressively address that. We also have to progressively, and that's where the master plan comes in. Obviously, if we want to continue working along the coast, we know where we want to go. Not only preventative, not only work, but we also have to sit down and start considering building up areas along the East Coast, in those areas that's primed for activities and those things like that. Not only do we have to stop the sea, we can actually look at reclaiming some of those lands. But obviously, the bigger question is, where will we be in 20 years from now? Where will we be in 2043? Will we, if we're going to concentrate all our resources as we are now along the coast, we definitely have to put, maybe the 250 Vern was talking about, maybe that's per annum, but in the next couple of years, we do have to start to sit down and start to address that.
So Vern responds that he was correct. He was referring to the populated areas from Parika to Mike.
Right. So, but then once again, you have the challenge. There is a shore base going up right now in Breeden. Yeah. Obviously, that now impacts on your sea defense work. Obviously, you have to be access. That shore base has to be accessible. It's surrounded. The access to that is through a populated area, which means populated from quite some while and those things like that. So we have to somehow marry all of this here to keep us apace. As I said, maybe a half a step might be too much for you, Terence. Maybe a quarter step, and we say, listen to me, we're gonna work on the populated area. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to build up some areas, prevent the sea in some areas. We're going to open up some land because, of course, we have a tremendous lot of mangrove coverages. And there's been a huge outcry on destruction of mangroves and natural sea defense. But if that area is earmarked for, let's be realistic, if you're going to earmark it for development, the mangroves may have to be affected. So therefore, you obviously have to take alternative plans and put that in place. You can't expect you to open up. Reedhoop is a lovely example. You can't expect, and that area there has a lot of mangrove coverage. Can't expect to have development along the riverbank and still keep the mangroves. Right? So we have to think. We have to talk about these things and not be emotive. Obviously, but if you don't say that you have a plan, a person just come and start removing the mangrove and then announce their plan after the public outcry, as what happened in Freedom recently, you run into a problem. So if you're going to develop it, say you're going to develop it, say that we're going to rebuild the earthen or you're going to put hard infrastructure for a 50-year storm, call that the 100-year storm or whatever specs you're going to use. And we're going to do it now and have a discussion. Another issue which Vermi wanted to know, and which is happening and which no one really wants to speak about, is the currents, how it's affecting our fisher folks and persons downstream. Of course, we all look at we're getting so much money from oil and gas, but the fisher folks have been complaining. They've been very, very vocal, and I encourage them because it's their livelihood. That the more we do along the riverbanks, it affects the persons downstream. So the Freedom Hoop shore base at the moment is affecting the persons downstream and upstream. So we have to also take all of these, put all of these inside the cauldron, mix them up, and come up with a lovely Guyanese brew to carry us forward.
Well, Arthur, cook-up is a kind of Guyanese food which has all these little things sitting in it. And Dennis is perhaps suggesting that we should not have started this cook-up or this pepper pot that we started here. So I want you to kind of help Dennis to understand. Dennis said, should we have started to produce the oil when we did not have all that we needed to put into it, perhaps reflecting David's quarter step? And in essence, we've put the carriage before the horse because we're being driven by the dictates in some way of the oil and gas companies. And so my thinking is, help Dennis to see that in a very real way, this was a train that we had to get on. And if we didn't get on this train, then perhaps there would be no other train for us. Everyone sort of assumes that, this would have turned out exactly the way that it has turned out. But it could have turned out differently. So, how do we address these questions of, look, there are challenges which, perhaps we will address at some point. Environmentally, the suggestion is that, perhaps this is impacting the livelihood of fishermen. It's certainly potentially impacting the mangroves, the building of the shore bases. We're not doing enough on an environmental side to be able to. But, this is the big world and this is the pepper pot we're in, and somehow we have to optimize in this current environment. So help Dennis to feel a bit more comfortable.
Sure. Yeah, I think there is an opportunity to allocate a percentage of the NRF to climate resilience and climate adaptation works. And I think if that's mandated by law, that would be a very important step towards balancing this fossil fuel production with, a low carbon strategy. I know there's been talks about climate resilience works, but I don't think there's anything mandated by law that would require a percentage, whatever it is that's decided from the NRF every year, that's allocated specifically and can't be used for anything else for, developing renewable energy, improving the sea defense, modernizing the utility, like David mentioned. All these things which are essential for Guyana to be around in the next 100 years. There's climate change is definitely, as Vern said, is not going to wait. And I think with the money that's available, there's a tremendous opportunity for Guyana to become a new type of oil producer, a low carbon oil producer. And there's a lot of carbon credits and offsets from Guyana's forest coverage that can be monetized. I think Guyana is maybe the country with the largest forest coverage in Latin America, behind maybe Suriname. It's over 80%. And there's a lot of demand for carbon offsets. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. There's been talks about it. Again, I don't think anything's materialized. But what I'm trying to say is that Guyana has the ability and the resources to manage both. The new emissions are definitely coming from this oil and gas production with a low carbon strategy. In terms of the question, sorry, I kind of diverted from that. Yeah, I think, I think Exxon knew how good of an opportunity they were sitting on. I don't think they would have left, anytime soon. But yeah, like Terrence mentioned, who knows what one decision is going to cascade and domino to other decisions and delay development. And then who knows, Exxon has a new discovery elsewhere in, let's say, Brazil, and decides to invest their resources there instead of in Guyana. So all those things can happen. It's impossible to really know, right? But there's no doubt it was a rushed negotiation. Guyana was unprepared, as we mentioned. Exxon is a powerhouse. They have the best lawyers, the best engineers, the best consultants working for them. So it's very hard to negotiate with a company like that. I think there definitely was room for improvement in that contract negotiation, but in hindsight, it's always easier. So I think Guyana did the right thing in jumping on that train, like you guys mentioned. At the end of the day, it's connected to the climate change narrative as well. That window is closing, right? We're seeing that in Suriname right now, that Total is hesitating to make the final investment decision and keeps pushing it back. There's several reasons, right? Some of them probably not even public, but they mentioned seismic data coming back somewhat inconclusive, and they're looking to have more results to be able to decide whether or not to move forward with the FID. Yeah. But definitely what I've been hearing is that the climate, their new climate goals is also playing a role. They don't know if they want to invest billions of dollars in this oil and gas development in a risky jurisdiction without, when they are redefining their energy brand. Now it's Total Energies, right? It's not Total Oil and Gas anymore. So I think Guyana could have suffered a similar fate. I think Guyana is a little bit different because the resources are so good in terms of the light, sweet crude. And there's still a lot of question marks around Suriname. But, you never know. If you don't hop in that train, the FID could have been pushed back, and we could be seeing a delayed or, an eventual kind of development at a much smaller scale. So I'll just leave it at that.
So in this development, go ahead, David. You wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I didn't have my red flag with me, but so this is red. Okay, this is what we're dealing with, because unfortunately, David, people are not talking about a step back or a half step back and so on. I believe, when we assess the situation, there's just way too much for my appetite. But then again, I'm not Guyanese. Way too much discussion going on in Guyana that, no, we should not be doing this. 16-year-old girl got pregnant. Well, and you know what? Now it's too late to say you had sex at an early age. The deed is done. People need to realize that. And I know, because I've discussed this with many people in Guyana. Oh, no, we can stop and leave the oil in. No, the deed is done. That is, you need to grow up and focus on the world that exists. And the world that exists is, and Guyana, serendipity, market forces, because folks, all the way up to 2014, another mega monster shell just lost money for decades in Guyana. And then some CFO decided one day, guys, we need to divest. And some CFO in Exxon decided, you know what? I think there's still an opportunity here. That guy or that woman is today's star, but could have been a donkey, just like the Shell CFO. And I think that's the challenge that we're dealing with. And I've mentioned this in our discussions on foreign investment and the engagement with the private sector. We've been involved with Go Invest since 1991. There is a endemic problem of a lack of a national consensus of engaging investment, not just foreign. I've sat down with people in Guyana where they tell me, no, we don't want no foreign investment. I say, yeah, but these guys are coming from St. Lucia. Yeah, they're foreign. And we're supposed to be a CARICOM market. So one of the major challenges, we have no national consensus yet on this. And despite a functional electoral democracy, anybody knows that just being elected to government, and Mr. Patterson knows that, does not make that a national consensus. That just happens to be, the conjuncture of the time. You won an election. Can you win it again? And that is the challenge. We are not having that consensus being built on. There's one reality of oil and gas, fossil fuels. There's another reality of a country that is a low carbon, natural resource country. How do you balance those and plan those over time? And I know we have people in the government that have been making that discourse, but haven't served in government. What happens? It becomes very difficult when you start getting constituents saying, well, no, we don't want that. We just want the good money from oil, but we don't want anything else. Well, unfortunately, nobody in the world has figured that one out yet. You either throw the baby out with the bathwater, or you take the baby and the dirty water and you try and make it better little by little. And because it is such a fraught political environment, my other phrase I've mentioned was our Caribbean penchant for recrimination and for, relitigating history. We want to go back to things 405. Guys, we're in 2023. And as God forbid, if some nicer investment comes along, Exxon is in this not for Guyana. Exxon is in this because Exxon is a business. Just like you're running your interest. Right now, I think that looks medium long term, but the conditions need to be created. And final point. Anybody who's been involved, and Arthur can speak to this, in the energy business prior to this decade will tell you, guys, compared to what it used to be before, this is a walk in the park. Before it used to be take it or leave it. We run the show. We tell you how it's going to be done, and end of story. All of a sudden, here we have a situation where these people sit down with communities, discuss issues. Yes, the world has changed. That's very good. But if we do not make the best of that opportunity, like all good opportunities, eventually they become lost opportunities. And that's a key point. So I just want
no, David, that's point well taken, and I think it's a theme for us. And I wanted to give David Patterson a chance to respond broadly, and then to take this one because it kind of lined up along those lines. So someone has asked, a more specific question. So we, I want you to speak to the general thought of like, this is an opportunity for us, and we have to take this opportunity. And the question is, how do we take this opportunity? And so someone has suggested, this Guyana's small domestic market justify the building of an oil refinery, and local need for fuel for cars is likely to decrease this transition from combustion to electric vehicles. So there is this strong, wherever you go around the world, there is this real strong sense. Obviously we can feel it. The world is getting hotter. And so there's a real strong sense that everyone is looking for a way to, as David said, to kind of somehow get the money, but also not do the things that would to somehow play this game on both sides of the fence. You're the part of the political leadership, part of the technocratic leadership. So you get the first go at the broader question, and then to speak to a question of an oil refinery as you see it from your perspective.
Thanks, Terence. I just wanted a quick response to David namesake thing. My recommendation for a quarter step is not in relation with oil production and those things. This discussion is on infrastructure. My recommendation for a quarter step is of planning. Right now, unless we do that, unless we take time out to plan, right, we'll be continuing as we are going now. I don't know if you see that as a good or bad, but I don't see it can't in the long run augur well for a country if we go without planning. Oil productions, obviously Exxon will do what it is, but we have to be prepared. If they're going into number 6 now, as Arthur says, 1.2, unless we are prepared, right? We started off at a disadvantage. We are getting the benefit, but if we are not prepared, and the quarter step is to get us prepared. It's not to stop Exxon, but it sits a set of well-intentioned and brighter persons that maybe than I am, sits on the table and said, listen to me, this is where we're going to do this, this is where we're going to do this. The world, quarter step back, private sector, these are where we're going to locate our industries, these are where we go, these are the issues we're going to address, go and have free reign or whatever reign you want to do it. And that was the context in terms of infrastructure, that we must have a plan. And right now, there's no holistic plan. It's not, Exxon will do it. They're here for business. I agree with you, every 100%. They're here to maximize profit. We, on the other hand, knowing that, have to plan for what we know, and we aren't doing that. So that was my point. It wasn't to do with Exxon. I don't think I even mentioned their name in this broadcast, because obviously this is they are on one half of the coin, we are on the other half. I'm representing the other half, Guyanese diaspora, everyone else that can benefit on this, and I want to see the benefit, because the bigger the pie is in Guyana, the healthier of chunks we can eat as Guyanese. So just that. Oil refineries, it is, they have been studied. I think it was Hadley's Industries, if I could call the name correctly, did a study on oil refinery, and it's did not prove economical at the present. There's certain challenges, logistical challenges. How are you going to get the oil of oil, which is ours, from SPSO, storage, usage, transportation, and those things like that. But it is one of those things that's a national pride, and then I think that's what has taken off in the sense that, if we've arrived, let us have an oil refinery, let us have whatever it is that a developed country has, we want to have. And so that drives the debate. I know that while I was there, our consumption, I think, was probably about 30,000 barrels, all told, diesel, as well as gasoline and all and products, including LFO for our generating system. And it did not support at the time a oil refinery. It definitely would have risen. We have a great influx of cars and those things like that. But when you do check, there's oil refinery in Suriname, Staatsolie is struggling. Trinidad, is struggling. I mean, you go to Aruba, Curacao, and these places like that. You know what I mean? And all of those, meaning Bahamas, all these oil refineries are under pressure. People are now consolidating oil refineries in the big area. But it's an emotive question. I mean, right now I don't think we're ready, but of course, I mean, I'm personally say it. I mean, just like aluminum plants. I mean, Russian bauxite are the only two places doing it at the moment. But everybody's saying, why can't we do it again? Got to be material here. So we have to look at the economics of it. There may come a time, but realistically, if we're transitioning from fossil fuel based country to the green economy, LCS, green state strategy, I don't really see it happening. But if we committed on to that end to make the transition, however, there's a lot of emotions on it. A lot of persons are thinking you can save money. Logistically, I mean, our capacity in 2015 when I came in, when I got in the ministry, we only have storage for 100,000 barrels. That included GPL and all the other private storage, 100,000 barrels, which I was anticipated would last us for 10 days, 8 to 10 days. If you're going to have an oil refinery, you got to have a capacity for. I mean, one of the transport ships, they offload 1.2 million barrels when they discharge. You have to have a storage for that million when it comes to shore and 1 million when you produce it. You mean so you now have to ramp up our local storage just for that oil refinery for $2 million. Does it make economic sense? At now, in my opinion, I mean, I'm no expert. It doesn't, but it's a very, very emotive question. And sometimes in Guyana, well, not sometimes, in Guyana, emotion sometimes trumps practicality.
Do you want to weigh in on this one, Arthur? There's another kind of.
I think that was good. I'm good with moving on.
Yeah. So here's the on your question of national pride. So the suggestion is, and there are two questions. So first, does it make sense to commission an aircraft carrier to satisfy national pride? And I want to take a personal point in this discussion to remind you, David, of some discussions you and I had many, many years ago about a company called Fly Jamaica. And so I know what your answer is going to be in terms of a national aircraft carrier. But I saw just a few days ago, someone shared with me the departure board, the photo of the departure board at the Temeri, I said the Chetty Jagan International Airport. I just dated myself. And it was the largest departure board that I'd seen in terms of flights from a series of airlines. So you're thinking national pride, not good, maybe not an oil refinery, but what about the return of the Guyana Airways cooperation?
Once again, that I could remember reading that Richard Branson once said, if you wanna go from being a billionaire to a millionaire, own an airline. So he said, look, we had a, and once again, it is an emotive issue. You know, I mean, there is a national status that you have your own airline. Persons do reckon that you're treated better, you'll be accommodated, that you can be. You know, I mean, you get preferential treatment, but the economics in it. You know, I mean, despite our and when we had the closest thing we had back there was Fly Jamaica, which was owned by a Guyanese, but was operating out of Jamaica because at the time when he started, Guyana was not Category 1 rated. I think we're about that at the moment. I mean, and at the time it had 34% of the New York market. He operated. I mean, he to his credit, I mean, until his accident, I mean, like, I think 60 or 70% of his crew was Guyanese based. So he was that was the closest. The numbers, unfortunately, just like the oil refinery, in my opinion, and the numbers I've seen, I mean, obviously, from 2020 to now. Maybe something has changed, so therefore, obviously, but Andre is right. It's not a good policy to because of national pride, you're gonna bring back the numbers don't sustain what it is that we're gonna do. The operational costs. I mean, obviously, there were several persons that tried to reintroduce during our tenure. We encouraged all of them reintroduce. They wanted to have a national airline, and I can recall even Fly Jamaica. There's a company out of Canada and these things. And I said the government will be supportive in the sense that we would waiver landing fees, give you concessional rates. I mean, because Guyana is a national company, we give you a line of credit to make it feasible and those things like that. But at the time, we did not see it feasible. We did several studies because wherever I went, Terence, and and that's how we had the competition. Wherever I went and I traveled, and I'm sure you hear that, you see why not bring back a and they one of the reasons, the main drive is not only national pride, is the competition and the assumption that you bring a national airline in, it will be subsidized, and once it's subsidized, it'll be cheaper travel. Once again, that's a money losing venture. I mean, if we do want to, without bringing in a national airline, if we do want as a policy subsidized travel, we cannot issue a travel voucher. I mean, I know Trinidad did that at one time, you know what I mean? So every citizen is entitled to 300 TT rebate or 300 TT voucher towards their travel. I mean, if we want to make it cheaper for our citizens, we have the money, we can do that if that's the policy that we want to make them travel. But invested in an airline in these circumstances, in this day and age, you have to be a brave person. There are braver persons than me. Hundreds of millions of that. But I see, even though national pride aside, once GSC went down, it really, really is hard for a country of 800,000 persons only. The annual figures transiting CGIA is 370,000 persons both ways per year. You know what I mean? That's hard to sustain.
So I just looked up at the clock and I'm sort of seeing that time is running away from us. And I was surprised that this question hadn't come up in our discussion thus far. So I'll give you both to weigh in sort of first on the broad. I mean, this is one of the major infrastructure projects that we're currently engaging, is the gas to energy project.
Yes.
And so Professor Monroe wants to know whether or not there's a capacity for the production of hydrogen and other products useful for agriculture and carbon sink, but not necessarily initially, but downstream. And so that's a specific question to technical. So if perhaps,
well, let me
I'll give you as the lead here. Sort of, it's 50. So I'll give you 3 minutes to kind of give
3 minutes. Unfortunately, I mean, I particularly stayed away from this particular topic because I know that you have and I may have an opportunity. First, let me say for the records, I mean, the Gas to Shore project, modesty aside, was one of the projects that I initiated. I mean, we initially in 2015 and 2016, Exxon were adamant that they were not going to, they had to re-inject or flare the gas, and we could not, they couldn't make full recovery of the oil without, if they pumped ashore. But between 2015 and 2017, we were able to move them back there. The 5,000 million cubic feet, they cannot produce these byproducts. I mean, this gas ashore will just be primarily will be electricity, and obviously the byproduct of LPG. I do assume gas. I mean, as I mentioned in my earlier statements, the most gassy finds are more towards Berbice. And if we are going to, down the long run, Norman, if we want to tap into that, we have to be deciding if we're going to pipe it all the way from Berbice area, I mean, which it doesn't make sense to me, but it may make sense to someone here, to go all the way to down to Wales. if that's even technically, it may be technically possible, but not, I don't consider it to be economically possible. So I don't see the Wales gas ashore project being the area where these other byproducts should be. It can be, it's more expensive, it ends up, but I do see in the future, as Arthur said this, we will have a hub, we can have a hub somewhere in Guyana, what take a little quarter step, whereby we can bring in all these fields, if it's technically possible, if it should be, in the southwestern side, and bring them all to shore, and obviously move ahead with the development. So, but from all the readings, the project will be limited for the to just production of gas, electricity, and LPG.
Thanks. You want to add to this, Arthur?
Yeah, sure. Just quickly. Yeah, I mean, I think David's right. I think there's still a question mark on how much gas there actually is in the Stabroek Block, and that definitely can impact Guyana's ability to develop a downstream industry. But with the initial plans for the gas to shore plant, there's not enough gas for those industries. I think there's a tremendous opportunity in this, let's say, cleaner fuel space. It's something that we cover a lot here at AMI. And whether it's producing green hydrogen, which is obviously a very hot topic in the energy sector, and it's going to be a reality only for a few select countries in Latin America, or, you know, providing the feedstock, the biomass for the production of these fuels. There's an opportunity there for Guyana, whether it's using sugar residue to produce these fuels, or some other type of agricultural waste. There's a lot of demand from big oil majors, including Exxon, looking to develop this portfolio of low carbon fuels. And if you have very cheap electricity, which that's the objective for Guyana and the government, there's an opportunity to develop these industries, because right now the biggest challenge, the biggest impediment is cost, and a big factor of that cost is the electricity cost. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward. It's not something that's going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years, but could happen in the next 5 years, let's say. And there's a lot of money to be made there.
Yeah, so, you know, so good conversations often can get done very, very quickly. We've been going literally for an hour and a half, and I don't feel like we've actually started. There's still a number of questions. So I guess I want to say my thanks first. So I'll give the order. So I'll say thank you, both of you, Arthur and David, for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation, and, you know, part of the comments, so part of the comments here, someone I noted said, you know, this is the kind of discussion that we need to be having on a consistent basis in the Guyana context, to really kind of put the issues on the table in a manner that allows for people to talk about them without some of the emotive and kind of clashing sort of personalities that often dominate the discussions, right? So, you know, if you have to make a decision about where you locate your gas to energy project, you know, if you start with an initial iteration at Wales, if most of the gas in the field is sitting close to Suriname, maybe it makes sense to think through some of the dynamics of how things get transportation, etc. And so to have that conversation outside of some of the more emotive spaces, I think is something that's important, and certainly our audience has sort of agreed with that. And so I want to thank you too, and to thank, you know, all the folks who've been listening. So I noted in our recording we had, you know, folks from Toronto, from the UK, obviously from the USA, from Guyana, from the broad spectrum of the diaspora across the world. So you guys are obviously people who people want to hear people say something. And so I'll give you a chance to say, you know, just, we're at 11:59, so 2 minutes to closing remarks. You know, just project out future. So, you know, what does this look like 20 years out? What what's the marker that you want to look at 20 years out? And then David will close by saying thank you from all of us. And so I'll go to you, Arthur Deacon, first, then David Patterson, then David Lewis.
That's a tough one. 20 years out. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from some of the Gulf states. I think what they've been able to do is pretty incredible, not only in terms of developing their society with the revenues that have come from oil and gas, but also now diversifying their economies. I think Saudi Arabia is doing that quite well. UAE, Qatar to an extent. Of course, it's a different type of regime. It's more autocratic. It's a little different, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from those countries in terms of bringing per capita wealth up for the entire population. Of course, there's going to be some select pockets within the society that are going to make a lot more money. But I think what they've done in terms of improving their overall services sector, improving their infrastructure, which is something that we've been talking about today, is a pretty good roadmap to follow. And none of this can happen without a roadmap. So I think that's something that's still missing from the Guyanese government, is a clear plan on how to develop this infrastructure, on how to spend these resources. And I know there's been talks and there may be stuff out there that I haven't seen, but I feel like there's still not a concrete, unified vision on, Guyana 2040, let's call it, on what they envision and how they're going to get there. So I think that's something that's still missing.
So Guyana 2040, David, what is envisioned and how do we get there? 1 minute.
Very modern, thriving economy. This is such a broad, right? This is such a broad topic. We haven't even spoken about efficient transportation. We haven't spoken about what's the better way for us to go. We haven't spoken about the issues of rail. We just concentrate on oil and gas. Mass movement of people. We haven't spoken about the reduction of the difference between our rural and urban communities. The infrastructure we're speaking about here, just as I said, a half-mile stretch along the eastern bank. But the wealth in Guyana, of course, are all offshore. Out of the urban centers, offshore in gas, natural resources in the rural areas. We haven't even addressed that as the area. But I would love to see a modern country, true and true. Not only a modern urban sense, obviously the more tongue can be as it is, but obviously the benefits of eco tourism, the benefits of natural resources can be given to our rural areas, and maybe we should start out there. Discussion is, let's green all our other communities, save and except Region 4, Region 3, the coastal region. Let's start addressing that. And obviously, as a Guyanese, true and true Guyanese to the bone, I love to see a country where everyone's benefiting equitably. That persons like yourself and David are back home, and we're sitting at a studio in Guyana as opposed to doing a Zoom somewhere else. And we reminisce. Oh, when we were there, just like how we do when we get together in the diaspora, come back home and we reminisce when we were outside, what we used to do, what we would have been doing. That's my dream and vision.
Well, David Lewis, David Patterson is looking forward to welcoming you back home to Guyana. So close us out for this one.
No, wonderful. And I always remind people my first visit was 1982. I then took the first U.S. investment mission in 1991. And really until 2010, not much had changed with regards to making it that modern country. So I think, again, Guyana is just in the middle of it. This is just starting, and there's great opportunities. My mother, who was from Trinidad in the 70s, used to tell us always, the problem is Trinis have more money than good sense. So Guyanese survived before oil because they had good sense. And I think we see that in the country, we see that in the diaspora. So good sense is always very important to keep in mind and to use that as sort of a driving north star in terms of what should be done and what shouldn't be done. She also used to say, sometimes having too much money is not good. Look at that poor Kennedy family. You know, they're just, you know, have all the money in the world, but everybody just dies. And so again, good sense and that norm of thinking, okay, what is that national vision? What is that national consensus? That's a challenge for the government because the government has to do many things at the same time. And the previous examples that have been discussed maybe did not have so much to do all at the same time. And the demands are on. It's not the same when you have a constituency in the world of electronic media in 2023 when you had a constituency in the 1970s. So I think this is all very important. I'm glad that the feedback has been very good from the different people in the audience. And just a quickie, somebody made a query regarding a wind power project still waiting 2 years on permits. Folks, unfortunately, 2 years on permits in Guyana right now is not bad. And I'm talking about people with real estate construction, housing, roads, and so on. That is the reality we're facing, and that's where the work needs to be done. So it won't be 2 years because it doesn't need to be 2 years. But David Patterson has been in the public sector. He knows the challenges. This isn't that people just don't want to do permits. No, it's the barrage is just way too much, and that's where the need is. We're closing. Our next webinar is Wednesday, October 11th. And if you thought this one was hot, folks, that one is on transparency and accountability in the new oil and gas economy in Guyana. And we hope to have a good set of talent, Guyanese and non-Guyanese, to discuss that with you all. Thank you very much, and you all be safe and have a good week.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Gentlemen, good morning.